Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah, I think so. I start with the good news. There'll be a coffee break at the end. So we only have 1 hour and probably 30 to 40 minutes. And I'm going to present you actually a very broad topic. This topic actually consists of 3 topics: the EU and the crisis, Germany, and the crisis itself. So this is rather broad field, and I can only give, or I can only formulate some more or less tentative hypotheses and some findings I have made already. We have changed the schedule so far that after my presentation and after the coffee break, Daniel, working for our institute as well, will present something on the domestic reasons why Germany survived this crisis in the good way it does and still doing. And tomorrow we too will present a new instrument for comparative analysis concerning governance. So we have just changed the presentations a little. What can you expect in the next, let's say, 90 minutes? And if you have any questions, not fundamental ones, let's say questions for understanding, just let me know immediately, because then we could discuss this immediately. And as you can see, my presentation will be different from the presentation yesterday, because I have a lot of pictures. Quite honestly, sometimes I think pictures are a little helpful. Okay, what can you expect in the next 1.5 hours? After a short introduction, I will turn to the roots and effects of the crisis. I've just given you some keywords like destabilization of governments, erosion of trust, and so on. Some of my arguments will overlap with the arguments I already presented on Monday. But promise, there's only, I think, one slide which I have just copied from this presentation. And then, of course, I will come to a special feature, the rise of populism in Europe and in Germany. And I will say something about Germany's EU policy. I start with the historical dimension and with very recent reactions. This part is more speculative part, because we lack clear comparative analysis on Germany's EU policy. And I will say something about the rise of the new German populist movement. During my presentation, I would like to discuss the following questions. How far has been the EU and Germany affected by the crisis? This is a very, I would say, the descriptive part of my presentation. But we come to an analytical part of the second question, and then a more speculative part with respect to the third question. But first of all, because if you come from Dresden or Warsaw, if you come from Brussels, everybody knows, pretends to know where Brussels is, and Bucharest, of course. So we come from a small town. And I would like just to explain to you where we come from, and then explain, you understand probably some of my ideas about Europe too. So our university is based here, actually. That is very close to France, 20 kilometers far from France, in the heart of Europe. Remote from everything, I would say. So this is a small town university. It looks like this. As the Vice President said, we are a very young university, founded in 1990. We have campus, quite remote from each other. It's not working very well. And this is a small town, as you can see here, and we are very strong in psychology, social sciences, and environmental sciences. These are, I would say, the 3 pillars of our university. And the university looks like this. This is my institute. It's the birthplace of the great-grandfather of Anne Frank. This is very nice, and if you are smart, and if you're not too tired, you can see what is going over there. Now there's some tables. Actually, it's a wine restaurant inbuilt on the Well, I come back to the wine later. My office, by the way, is this one. And here you can see the modern part. So the university has 9 different buildings. And these are the new buildings, and this one, I don't know if you know this from Romania, this university is occupied. So the students occupied the university to protest against the lack of resources, and we, of course, as civil servants, are not allowed to support them openly, but we get it. Because, we have interest in more resources as well. Okay, then, of course, the last picture. Why? Well, this is a wine area, actually, and you can see here we have very big areas of wine. And this one is the mayor of the city, and this one is my student. And she became wine princess. Wine princess is a very good job. First of all, you have to know a lot about wine, and you have to know how to dance, because you're always invited to parties, and you have to represent, to do some marketing even overseas. So she was so lucky she could travel to Japan, for example, just to sell some German wine. I'll come back to this issue. What did I think? She wasn't one of my best students, but okay, I can skip this one. I would say you can read it because everything will be uploaded. I don't think this will be interesting. So you just, I want to let you know that I'm doing a lot of studies on Africa. Africa is, I would say, my heart beats for Africa. But nevertheless, I have to teach German foreign policy, European foreign policy for this time. Okay, so we can skip this. Well, I would like to start with a discussion why Germany behaved in the crisis like it does. There was a lot of criticism against Germany because Germany reacted very, I would say, reluctant to the crisis. And I think there are some psychological, deeply rooted psychological traumata relevant for this. And I call it the German Angst versus the German assertiveness. The phenomenon of Angst, of fear, of deeply rooted fear is not new. In 1789, the first time the mass phenomenon was visible for the people at that time. It was the French Revolution, and when there had been the conservative reaction towards the French Revolution, when people were really afraid and started murdering each other. So it was a very bloody period of the French Revolution, and there was no obvious reason for this except the grand peur, the great fear. And of course, this also has become in Germany so many books about the German Angst that although the people enjoy quite a decent standard of living, there is always a psychological, deeply rooted angst of this. It is also always connected with the discussion about the rise of National Socialism. And what we mean actually is the great fear to lose status and income, especially of the lower middle classes, and some lower middle classes were made responsible for the rise of National Socialism. So the German debate, and this economic debate about crisis and about economic crisis, financial crisis, is very much anchored, I would say, in historical experiences. First of all, in the 1920s. You can say, oh my goodness, this is long ago. Yes. But I believe, and I come from the constructivist field in this respect, that these collective memories still play a role. Although it's around 19 years old now. You can see there are some parallels. That banks go bankrupt, and there was a run for the money. And the situation in 2009, when even some German banks collapsed, reminded people very much of the situation at that time. Although it's 8 or 9 years ago. That's really an interesting thing, and many politicians in their speeches they mentioned this crisis, this time of crisis. And you can see the votes for the National Socialist Party increased during the crisis. The deeper the crisis went, the higher the support for National Socialism. There was a second inflation, 1945, was the total use. This one is a newspaper. It says 1 D-mark or 1 mark at that time, 1 million mark, $1. This is hyperinflation, as you can see it. And here you can see German marks needed to buy 1 ounce of gold. I don't know, actually I cannot read this figure. Some trillions or whatever. And even 20 trillion marks, and you can buy nothing for it. But people had big bags for their money at that time. And this one is an extremely well done banner of National Socialist Party, where the last hope is Hitler. And you see the poor, impoverished masses. And this makes for Germans always a situation that inflation combined with high unemployment rates will lead to extremism. So this is not, this is a very German typical feature. And here, of course, you have these people, I look for work, for any work. So the desperate people actually. And even such figures as the president of the Reichsbank at that time, if you read through, people lost direction, lost course actually. And they became confused with the situation. They were looking for radical alternatives. And Hjalmar Schacht played one of the key roles when it came to German rearmament under Adolf Hitler. He was an excellent technocrat, not interested in politics, but totally confused during this time. And of course, it has some psychological effect of frustration, fear, and anger. And together with other historical factors, this led to Hitler, to extremism. And of course, this economic distress combined with some other psychological factors like the lost First World War, the Treaty of Versailles, and so on. So this was the reasons for the rise of national socialism. What does it mean? The historical experiences, I would say, still play a role in the debate, and yes, you can see there's a general fear of inflation. And keeping up the value of the money became the core aim of the German economic policy, especially of the German central bank in Frankfurt. And if you analyze, if you compare the two documents, the founding document of the German Bundesbank and the EZB, it is very similar. So the blueprint came from the German system, actually, for the ECB. And still, as I told you, still economic crisis, instability crisis, and that's the worst two other figures. So the German debate started as a very historical debate, interestingly enough. And if you see the survey results, still, the fear to lose money still plays a big role. For example, do you fear, do you have angst of losing your own savings, money you save? And 49% in 2012 said, yes, I'm afraid to lose money. And yes means now, it was October, it was June and March. Okay, June and March. And you can see the fear decreased a little bit. No, it was stronger from June to March 2013. Still, over the Germans perceive the crisis as a threat to their own savings, not an abstract political economic crisis. And again, the German Angst, you can see it here, they fear that the crisis will mean higher costs for the taxpayer because of the debt crisis. But this is quite good. So for every government, they look, I mean, they're notorious for looking up for survey data. All these opinion polls, they're made exclusively sometimes for government. They know the situation. If you ask them about bailout, if you see the bailout funds, Germany is financing up to 30% in general, 30%. You can see here, the support for Greece, 80 billion. Germany's part, 30%. And you can see the, we call it a Rettungsschirm, I really prefer this word, instead of bailout fund, it's 750 billion, again, 30%. And if you explain German taxpayers, so if the banks or countries collapse, we have to contribute 30%. This is not something you would say during electoral campaigns. But unfortunately, we have a federal system in this respect, unfortunately. So we have regional elections every couple of months. So every government is, of course, calculating about participating in these extremely high bailout funds. For example, Germans really don't like that the ECB is buying all these bonds from the highly indebted countries. So I didn't find anything in English like this one. So as you can see, it's impressive, and the amount of money is quite, let's say, quite unbelievable. Roots of the crisis. I think we tackled this question yesterday too, so I can be extremely brief with this point. The European crisis is rooted in the failure of institutional design. There are bursting arguments like others argument that, of course, I mean, you cannot have a currency union without an economic or at least a fiscal union, and you know all these arguments, I'm sure. And of course, in the long run, you would also need a political union, which Germany tried to introduce in 1992, but it couldn't be realized at that time. And we always argue, we cannot have a currency union or an economic union without a political union in the long run. it was Germany and France which weakened the stability pact. And many people in Germany forget this. It was Germany and France declaring, well, these are special circumstances, you know, and so the stability pact is no longer valid for us. Good morning. And you have some, and of course I would say there is a responsibility of Germany and the richer states too, because of, we offered cheap money to economically weak states. And what they did actually was financing a big party. Because, I mean, they received money for the same interest rates that Germany received money. But the economic performance was poor. And so I would say sometimes it reminds me more that these countries could receive credits and credits. And of course, nobody, because we just reading the stability pact, could stop this. So I would say the responsibility for the crisis also on the German side, but the Germans would never agree with this. The official government would never. Well, the crisis, and the crisis started like this. You know, the problem was that, that the economic recession took place, and the banks increased interest rates, and to finance large public programs, deficit spending, they had to borrow more money, and what you can see here was the interest in 2010 exploding in the case of Spain and Greece and Ireland. This is 10 years old, 10 years. If you want to have money for 2 years, short term, it would have been even much higher, another 10% or something. And I think economists agree, hopefully they really agree, that interest rates over, let's say, 8% are unsustainable. Well, that's a big debate in economics, you know. But what you can see too, the interest rate for Germany is going down. Well, that means refinancing of Germany was cheaper and cheaper during the years. And this says something about winners and losers here. So not all countries lost during the crisis. Although Germans perceive, I mean, we are in danger, and so this is a threat to our welfare system and everything. But in reality, from interest rates, Germany benefits from it. And if you see here the economic growth, gross domestic product, you have the Eurozone on average. The crisis here was 2009, as you all might know, so in Germany, everywhere I would say. But what you can see here, the crisis is not over yet. It's a little bit weaker now. But in Germany, we have still economic growth. This is the exception. So some countries are even in a big mess, like Cyprus or Greece. So that means the economic development is taking a very different path. But we are united in the European Union. So this is not easy for the European Union to cope with these problems because they are so different. Well, government instability. I don't want to dive deeper into this. There are many cases where government had been outvoted, where government was considerable turmoil for government, and so on and so on. I think this is quite clear. You've probably come from some countries where you expect changes in government because of protests and so on as well. You have all these I don't know what happens there. You have all these movements establishing. You have mass action, the culture of protest in France, and all these things. You have a relatively high voter volatility in some countries, so you have large swing elections. But also, of course, I mean, if you have mass action in your own country, you can use it as a bargaining field. For example, you can go to the commission and ask them, you know, we have a little problem of stability in our country. And you can use it as a bargaining tool to get better conditions for economic funds, which will support you. So if you analyze the negotiations Cyprus with the Troika, it really comes out that Cyprus is using the argument of instability to get more better conditions. Well, then you have all these street protests. And the interesting thing is in 2010, 2013 in France. So it doesn't matter which kind of government you use, but the conservative Sarkozy government or the more left-wing Hollande government. So the protests are continuing. This is a message. I mean, in France they have been lucky because they have different debates there. So protests against the crisis austerity measures stopped for a while. because they had all these discussion about the homosexual marriage, but only for a short time. Only for a short time. Well, of course, you know that there's declining support for the EU. Anything else would be really surprising. The decreasing trust. I already mentioned this on Monday, so I can be extremely. Well, usually, you know, people burn the American flag, but in Greece they started to burn the European Union flag, which was never seen before. Of course, these are performances for the media, of course. We should be serious about this. I mean, this is a media thing, but nevertheless. And I already showed this one, trust into national government, national parliament, union, it's a disaster. But even more for the national institutions. So they are even more affected than the European Union. Nevertheless, people expect, people actually do not know which institution could take best action against the crisis. So the European Union is, I would say, still at the top. Although only 20% believe that the European Union is the best actor to fight against the effects of financial and economic crisis. And again, the national government is not much credit, I would say, and the United States either, and so on. So this means that people actually have lost direction. There's no clear hope at the end of the horizon. Well, okay. Oh yeah, show this one first. Yeah. Well, I took a picture from the tabloid press, from the German tabloid press. The tabloid press, especially the so-called Bild-Zeitung, and you can argue, okay, this is the tabloid press, the yellow press, but nevertheless, according to my information, 10 million people are reading this paper every day. 10 million people. But of course, they have really a campaign against Greece. You bank Greece, you could sell your islands, which is a clear offense, myself. And this is a kind of style. And on the other hand, of course, when Angela Merkel visited Athens, there was a nice theater performance. I mean, this is pretty well organized. So you have, of course, all these Greek patriots, mostly from the left side, dressed up in National Socialist uniforms and so on. So it became an ugly war of words, I would say, which was unknown in Europe. There was always a kind of respect. You don't play with these historical things and historical trauma, but they were reactivated. The Germans stereotype is southern states cannot handle money and finance properly. This is a stereotype. And the Greek stereotype, of course, is another one. You can see it here. And okay, and of course, this media plays a role. So I really desperately wait for some studies dealing with the role of the media in this crisis. That would be really interesting because they enforce the whole crisis, I would say, in the nation. This is unrelated. Well, the aggressive stereotypes, but of course we have a very serious debate still ongoing about what is solidarity in the European Union. And it was the Prime Minister of Slovakia, I think, who said, what about solidarity? How can I explain to my engineers that they agreed to cut budgets to help Greece people, also Greek people enjoy a higher standard of living? Well, these questions, you know, they're very difficult to tackle with. For Germans, it's not such a big problem, but I would say in general it's a big problem for the European Union. I love this picture. Some of you know this picture already. I know you're bored with it. I know. Because this is something about the crisis. And I asked the students who know this famous picture just to give me an interpretation. So what can you see? What can you see? Describe the picture. I often have, when I have a written exam, I just present a picture and ask the student, describe it and explain it. What can you see?
The national leaders standing in front of the EU institution.
The national leaders, exactly. And the European leaders. Well, first of all, they were early in the morning after a long session, and they came out of the room. And you know, you are tired. You negotiate for 8 hours. So it's a very nice picture, actually. You can see Herman van Rompuy. Well, I don't comment on this one. And you know this? You know this Trichet, exactly, the ECB leader. Okay, so the national governments are in front, and Angela Merkel is the first. What else can you see? Who's this one? Oh, you know. What happened to him? outvoted, big defeat. So some of these leaders, him as well, no longer active. So they fall victim to the crisis. Again, this is a very nice picture to see that there are some, some effect on the institutional setting of the EU and on the balance between between EU member states, institutions, and of course about the reaction. Peace no longer active too. No longer active too. So this is history. And history accelerates always in times of crisis. Well, the winners are, and I presented this one, I think I stole this one from Monday. You all know this, so I can skip this immediately. But again, no institution or no individual really took the lead. If you remember the presentation given by our colleague from Hungary, his idea was leadership. Leadership is always offering a vision, but there was no vision, nothing, except austerity. What is the rise of populism? Populism. Well, with populism, if you look it up in your computer, I hope you have internet today, then you will find numerous definitions. For me, it's like, I can compare it with pornography. I cannot describe what it is, but when I see it, I immediately know that's pornography. Because, there's a fine line between erotic art and all this stuff and pornography. So I don't know, I cannot define it theoretically, but when I see it, I know pornography. It's the same with populism. And I wouldn't say that average political parties or center parties, they have populism as well, but they are populist parties as well. The typical things are they're offering simple solutions, they have emotional appeal usually, and I call it, from Africa research, the politics of the value. That's more instinctive, very material policy. We have left and right-wing populism, as you might know, and I call it a thin ideology. Why? Because if you really ask them for concepts, it's not a holistic concept. They never offer a holistic concept. They only focus on very few questions. And it's always against the corrupt elite, which is only self-interested from this perception, self-enrichment. And we, the real people, the ordinary people, against the elite. It's part of identity politics to try to construct, especially on the right side, homogeneous people. And it's often institutional, so they don't argue in terms of institutions, they always argue in terms of individualism and stereotypes. Yeah, I have some examples. And the problem is, the rise of populism paralleled, took place in the same period than the economic crisis. So there might be some, I'm very cautious with this, there might be some correlations. This is quite clear, the Front National, you know this. And this one. This is Michael Farage, the leader of the United Kingdom Independent Party, who became strongest party in the European elections. And of course, it's the immigrants. And here it is the immigrants too. And here it is directly against Brussels. So the topics of this campaign of all populist parties have been anti-immigrant, of course. This is a long-standing traditional argument. Immigration is responsible for all ills in our society. But the other one is a direct attack on Europe this time. This has something to do with fear of losing sovereignty, but also, I would argue, with the crisis. Again, we need some empirical documents for this, some empirical findings. This would be a good topic for an MA thesis, probably in dissertation. And you can see this is a Europe-wide phenomenon. The UKIP in Great Britain won 25% of Front National, 24 seats in the European Parliament, the Front National, and in Germany, the so-called alternative for Germany. The real right-wing parties, they have only one seat, but nevertheless they have one seat. Why? Because our constitutional court decided to democratize the elections and to get rid of any threshold. So the effect is quite clear. We have a lot of populists now. And they received 119 seats altogether. But if you also add parties like the FPÖ in Austria, you could easily count 200 seats for right-wing and left-wing populists or EU enemies, because there's a, I would say there's a blurred line to conservative parties. The line, something is very difficult to make, to see the difference. The big question is, of course, is it a danger for democracy? Any answers? I discussed with master and PhD students. What do you know from empirical findings? Is this a danger populism, or am I on the wrong track? Oh, we have 200, let's say 200 right-wing, left-wing populists and some of these conservatives, for example, British conservatives. I would say they're EU skeptics as well. So it's a little bit more moderate. For example, they're not like UKIP party representative was asked, so what to do about the people, the boat refugees coming over the Mediterranean? And he said in an interview, we just should sink their ships. Which is cynical, but nobody would say this from the Conservative Party, but they would say it would affect Britain as well. So is it a danger? Oh, come on, back up. I know it was a long day yesterday. Well, it depends. I mean, every political scientist would say it depends. Of course, you know this. I would say yes and no. You could say the worst thing is it influences the agenda of other parties if they are successful. And you can see this clearly in the German case, that members of the government coalition take arguments from the populists in the discussion about what to do about the European crisis. Especially the CDU, CSU, they are these conservative parties in Germany. They take arguments. And of course, it is a blow for democratic political culture. I visited an election campaign, an election rally of the AfD, the German Communist Party. There was not something of exchange of arguments, of course, nothing. It was to celebrate their leader. That was the only thing. So in discussions, it's not very funny to discuss it. Other colleagues would argue, no, this is positive because it's a wake-up call. We should do something about the problems. People feel not represented in everything. So in the long run, populism will contribute to reforms and to a renewed political agenda. I'm not sure. I don't know. I think there's a very different logic, and probably we have to make a distinction between populism in young democracies and more mature democracies. I would say this is very difficult otherwise to generalize. But probably think about it. Probably in your country, if you have populist parties, think about what could be the long-term effect. I'm sure they will not disappear so fast. I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure that they will last. Okay, so I think we need another 20 minutes. Then we have some Q's and A's if you want. Well, European integration. Of course, I could give a whole lecture on this topic, Germany and European integration. But I don't want. So I just listed some findings. European integration is a special case for Germany. I would say more for most other countries. After national socialism, it became part of the German identity and part of the Staatsräson, so the national interest. Even our basic law, it says Germany promotes European integration. And this is a clear vision. I haven't seen something like this in the British constitution. Well, no, they don't have a constitution in this sense. But even in the French constitution, I don't see there's something like this. Well, after 1990, of course, the problem was what to do with Germany, the unified Germany, and they found the solution. Because the German question, Germany trying to dominate Europe, the European solution is very simple. Just include Germany. For example, you should deepen the integration with Maastricht Treaty. Germany would give up the Deutschmark for the euro, but it means it would be, Germany would support the politics of self-binding obligations. So more Europe was the answer for Germany, and not less Europe. And Germany increased funds for weaker EU members. It was, not today. It was, I would say, one of the advocates for Eastern enlargement. Especially Germany putting a lot of pressure on France to agree on Eastern enlargement. at that time. Things have changed, as we know. But at that time, they did. Well, in Germany, we know it's the largest contributor to the EU budget, but we benefit from it. But in all public debates, the people usually say we are the paymaster of Europe, which is on the first side correct, because we pay the highest share, but on the other hand, we benefit from it. And economists, Werner Sesselmayer from Landau as well, they just tried to calculate it. They calculated between 0.6 and 0.8 of GDP we own because of the large EU money. Well, this is pretty difficult to calculate, but nevertheless. On the other hand, Germans, I mean, they're 80 million and they have 99 seats, and of course, this is progressive proportional representation, which is from a point of democracy, one man, one vote, not unproblematic, I would say. But if we insist to have a direct proportional system, more countries wouldn't have any number of parliaments. So the political deal is, of course, a digressive proportional system. Well, trading partners, yeah. Germany survived the crisis quite well, and I'm going to show you some economic factors for this. Daniel represents the political factors. Why Germany survived the crisis? I would go so far to say, in some respect, Germany is the winner of the crisis. But not just because Germany wanted to be the winner, but because some arrangements proved to be very sustainable. What you can see here, you see the trading partners. The Netherlands is imports, and France, our biggest partner. And you can see China is less important than Austria when it comes to exports. Of course, I could have chosen different indicators, but I thought this one is quite even Poland. I mean, after these lectures, we know more about Germany than about Poland, I'm sure. But Poland, 32 billion. This is quite a large sum. In Czech Republic, we import a lot. So you can see, and the interesting thing here again was in 2012, another statistic. But the interesting thing is the surplus. The surplus. So with export import, when it's in the balance, in October 2013, you see a surplus of 19 billion. Think about it, 19 billion in 1 month. And it went up to 30 billion in 1 month. So this is export number one. And this is highly problematic for other European countries. And Germany was very successful. Oh, this has a disadvantage. We are very vulnerable. This is the number of people calculated in 2006, the number of people whose job is depending on export. 8.9 million. That means out of the workforce of 27, that means we have probably 20 to 25% of the German workforce dependent on export. So if export is not running, we will face a crisis. But in this respect, the losses in EU trade, because of the crisis, I mean, price in Mercedes-Benz increase when you are in the crisis. Well, you can say all the people who can have a tax evasion, okay. But except these people, I would say, the exports to European countries decreased. But this was compensated by stronger exports to the US and the BRIC countries. Many Germans, and I think Tino mentioned it, many Germans believe that they are highly they're competitive on world markets. So, together with China and the United States and some of the BRICS countries. In some, I would say some sectors, machinery for example. Then the low interest rates I mentioned, and of course, there was a certain inbuilt crisis resistance. The political debate, I mean, this is the American magazine. 10 years ago, they had a title, a cover, which said, Germany, Europe's sick man. And now, even the Americans said, oh, this could be kind of a model. So we found ourselves in a position of being called a model for others. If I think in neorealist terms, by the way, this would lead to ganging up of the other countries. In neorealist terms, it would mean ganging up, so to stop a hegemon or dominant power. But it helped us very much, high employment, female yield deficits, and the low-cost state refund. So we pay 0.1% interest rate because of capital markets. This is great to reduce state debt, and we did it up to 5% in years. Well, unemployment, youth unemployment, as you can see here, Germany 7.4, which is not, I would say, not very good. But the other countries, I'm not sure whether Croatia is really 49%. Greece was 59. I mean, Greece was never under 50% historically, in historical perspective, never. But 49, 49, I mean, it's unbelievable. In Germany, with this unemployment rate, we would have had riots immediately. Because of this historical thing, the atmosphere of crisis and everything. If we have more than, I would say, 8% unemployment rate, that's a very different debate in Germany right now. And then the political things. It was a big sensation for Germans. It was a Polish Prime Minister who said, I'm more afraid of German passiveness than of German power. So that means you should take the lead. I will try to explain you why we couldn't take the lead. It's very simple. It's not because of history, I would say. And all countries agree Germany, because of the strongest economy, has special responsibility for the crisis. What factors are determining Germany's EU policy? This, I would say, formula could be used for an analysis of the foreign policy of all member states. First of all, you have the member state-specific factors and the policy-specific factors. You have stable factors and changing factors. So, the EU policy of a certain country depends on these factors. Probably you can add some, of course. For example, constitutional framework, political culture, regulatory orientation, composition of the government. Of course, it makes a difference whether you have the socialists ruling or governing France or the Front National. It could happen very soon. It will make a big difference. I think it's obvious. If you use this formula, the following comes out for Germany. I mean, the basic attitude, I would say, is increasing trust in Germany. The basic law, so the constitutional side, is stable, but our constitutional court has made really ambivalent decisions with respect to the European Union. So on the one hand, they said, okay, it is the Lisbon Treaty is in line with the German basic law, but it's no longer possible that Germany agrees on the supranational level to give loans and credit when the Bundestag and Parliament is not confirming this. So this limits the leverage of the government policy. Political culture, I'll come to this later. What is important, we have now, the economic situation, by the way, is good, for some people even excellent. But there's, I guess I would say, the fear of the future, which is really psychological. Our problems, and we come to this tomorrow, is, for example, demography. The problem with demography. We have a political challenge from the right, from the populist party. Comes this in not only 10 slides more, yeah, okay, 10. Well, I would say we have with the rise of the alternative for Germany, we have the first time in Germany an anti-EU populist movement. We have been exceptional for decades because we didn't have any populist movements, and no right-wing party. In the 1960s, well, okay, in the 1960s, but we didn't have any right-wing party. Although we have right-wing parties, radical parties, ready for violence, but they don't play a role. It's still a taboo. If you confess to someone that I'm a member of this party, you are excluded from, I would say, the society. So even from your friends, they would turn their backs and say, that's it. Because it's still a taboo, and has, of course, really historical reasons. You can see the last German national elections, the AfD, 4.7, that means they hit the threshold, but they didn't make it. But that was a warning, because, okay, you can see this one, they received then 7% in the European Parliament elections. They are funded, especially by business, by big and small business, they are funded by them. They attract voters from the liberal and conservative and, let's say, Christian conservative parties, and some from the Greens as well. So for the Liberal Party probably will cease to exist in Germany very soon. This continues. This is the leader, Bernd Lucke. I had the opportunity to discuss this with him. It was really He's a professor for macroeconomics. Can you imagine, this is a professor leading a populist party. His followers are quite different from him. He's an intellectual, but his only point is macroeconomics. It's a one-issue party at the moment. It's only one issue here. The goals of the AFD, no guarantees for the debt of other countries. So leave all the bailout funds immediately. And if Greece cannot manage it, they could leave. Probably we have parallel currencies, the Greek government and the euro together, and they should declare bankruptcy, especially the southern countries. So a very tough stance against the island at the country. Of course, no intervention by the ECB. The private sector, this is interesting, this is another thing. The private sector should be responsible for bailouts. And this is one thing that is uniting all populists among across Europe, that the banking sector, which is partly responsible for the crisis, should be made responsible for the crisis. This will happen with the banking union, which is now under discussion. And any transfer of sovereignty should be legitimized, that means should be abandoned by a referendum, by a plebiscite. German EU policy in turbulent times can be explained by domestic factors, I would argue. I would say there are two different phases. The first period is up to 2001, when the Constitutional Court decision came. That was the important one. And that was, I would say, was a period when Germany put the foot on the brake of European policy. Germany blocked European decisions, with the result that Europe couldn't make any far-reaching decisions at that time. So it was kind of paralyzed during this period. No bailouts. Although they signed the bailout agreement for Greece, but they always sold it to the public that they didn't actually subscribe. And of course, Germany was on the side of the austerity policy. That explains the verve, the strength of protests against Germany and the EU. So it was Germany, the EU Commission, and the IMF who have been responsible for the austerity, more or less. That was the picture the media transported. And of course, they supported IMF policy. But again, I would say for domestic reasons. There were regional elections in May 2010. Very important. When the Bundesland was 17 million people. And the government, the Merkel government, tried to slow down the whole process of decision-making in the EU because she knew it would have been extremely unpopular to sign a bailout agreement. So she waited and waited, and during the time of waiting, the markets reacted. So currencies became under pressure, massive pressure from the rating agencies. The rating agencies played a, I would say, ambivalent role in the whole process. So again, Germany opened the opportunity for markets to put pressure on national governments and national currencies. Why have we been so reluctant? And even the Americans noticed, why don't you take the lead? If even the Polish Foreign Minister asked to take up the lead, why don't you do it? It was unpopular. It was a very simple reason. And we have many individual legal complaints against 37,000 against the ESM, the European Stability Mechanism. So there was a lot of pressure from constitutional court, interest groups, business, and you have even anti-Eurobond coalition in Germany. This is a coalition. This is a coalition of the anti-Eurobonds. This is a coalition also in favor of Eurobonds. And what you can see here is the government, Bundestag majority, German industry, and the commerce organizations are very much against Eurobonds. The opposition, which was weak at that time, the Social Democrats and the German trade unions, are in favor. But this coalition was much stronger, and this coalition was strongly supported by the media. The German media was very much on the side of conservative. So that means no Eurobonds even up to today. And this means a permanent conflict with the European Central Bank and the German government. But then the policy changed. Now, bailout funds have been supported, and Germany introduced all these stricter budget controls. Debate about economic governance in Europe emerged. We promoted the international transaction tax, kind of Tobin tax, against British resistance. It was always Germany and France on one side, and Britain and Czech Republic on the other side. And we are very strong with the banking union. And with the banking union, if you analyze the banking union negotiations, it clearly came out that the German ideas were dominating. Why? Because the Germans just said, you know, we, from this fund which will be now created, we pay 30%. If you want us to pay, you have to install the following principles. And for example, they did it. And this was, the EU, the Germans preferred to stay outside the EU institutions because inside the EU institutions it's very easy to overvote them, to overrule them. Because Germany has 29 votes, and France has 29 votes, and Britain. And with 29 votes out of 200 something, 270, it's very difficult to get a majority. But within these new institutions, there are only limited countries, limited number of countries, which is the Eurozone, and the German share is much stronger, so the German government prefers to do business outside the normal institutions. This is contrary to one's policy last 50 years ago. And of course, they are so strong economically that they could bail out their own banks, the saving banks, and they could save their special status as well. So this is some effects. For example, if you ask, if you judge the current economic situation, the situation of the economy is total good. Germans say 82%, Sweden 85%, France 7%. And you have these big discrepancies all over Europe. And where's Poland? Poland, 35%. But plus 13, so it changes, and that it changes. This is very unusual, 82%, because the German culture, I would say, is the culture of pessimism. I mean, well, this one is a little bit too low, but if I would ask Joe from California, what is the glass half full or half empty, he would say it's half full. Germans would always say, oh, half empty. This is a very typical German approach, but here, this is a big sensation. Germans are satisfied with the economy and their way of living. This is really a big difference to the other countries. If you see it here, total good for Germans, 75%. Look at the other countries. The outer pie, 27 only good. So this makes a difference. And so the irony is that we're discussing crisis times, but for Germans, they are good times. But the question is, I mean, how to get this together, and what does it mean if the strongest economy is in quite good shape? Okay, so to summarize, the problem is for dealing with the crisis that Germany cannot take the lead, or cannot take, I would say, strong measures against the crisis because of domestic resistance. I mean, we don't mean taking up the lead in the sense of dominating. Taking up the lead in Europe always means forming coalitions. Probably together with France, but we have a problem with France. Germany and France used to be kind of motor for long, in the 1970s, 80s. But this has stopped. Why? Because of domestic politics in France. France is in a very severe, difficult economic situation, and politically, the government is losing support. And everybody expects the Front National to take over someday. And how to negotiate with the Front National. So this is, France as a partner is difficult. Where are the other partners? Italy, in crisis. Britain, I wouldn't say interested, not interested. Probably Poland, yes. The Weimar Triangle is probably a chance. Probably Poland. But has Poland enough influence? No, because Poland is not a member of the Eurogroup. And the Eurogroup, remember my argument on Monday, will be the next EU, more or less. Probably take some new members, but okay. And the problem in the German discussion is it's a lot about history. And you may say it's irrational, but even irrational factors can play a role in a construction on this side. So it's very difficult to say for a German, okay, we give a special loan to Greece, another 5 billion. Or if a bank is in danger. I mean, the irony is we spend for one bank, the Hypo Bank, 120 billion euros just to save this bank. This is more we spend for Greece. The public is not quite, I would say, critical against banks. German people start to hate banks, I would say, at the moment. But it's much more than we used to take. The whole Europe was ready to give to Greece. We don't, I think Angela Merkel has no European vision. She herself is from the East, as you know. She has not much experience with the EU. There's not a single person in her cabinet, among the cabinet ministers, who has experience with Europe, first-hand experience. This is a big problem. And there's a generation issue. The generation of, I would say, my parents, was in favor of Europe. Europe was a chance to get back on the international agenda, there's a big market, you're guaranteeing a place for Germany, and so on. But this emotional, historical experience, and this positive social and political experience is not reflected in the younger generation. So for most of you, the young generation, this is all self-evident. You don't have to fight for this anymore. This is Europe, it's realized. And you don't have visions. And to say they have a vision in Germany can be quite dangerous, because if you say, oh, we would like to have the United States of Europe or something like this, the electorate will punish you for this immediately. And of course, the whole EU system is a historical try, I would say, to prevent dominance or hegemony. All the decision-making rules are, I would say, installed to prevent that one country can dominate politically. But that makes it difficult to have fast-track decisions. I would say this is most promising Americans who actually think we have a European government. No, we don't have a European government. We have 28 governments. We have some bigger ones and some weaker ones. But to make a decision in Europe is quite difficult in the crisis times. It's more difficult. I think I've talked a lot, and I would be happy if you have some questions which we can discuss. Thank you so much for your patience. Okay, any questions or critiques? I'm interested in views from other countries too, because I try to be a little provocative. Any questions? Oh yeah, sure.
You are linking very clearly.
Sorry, I didn't get it.
You are linking very clearly economic expansion and populism.
Yeah.
But, for example, in Italy or even in France or in Germany, Piraten, the PPO, these are not real populist right-wing extremists.
Yeah, I would say there's a correlation. But of course, we need some empirical data about this. Between crisis and the rise of populism. Of course, the roots of populism are much deeper. I mean, Front National has gained strength under new leadership. Okay, there are some additional factors, I would say, because Marine Le Pen, she's, I would say, from first sight more sympathetic, probably more pleasant than her father, who was really one of these old right-wing guys. But, you know, yes, I would say this is a reflection of the crisis. The crisis, of course, is a general discussion, do we need the EU and all these things. So I would say that it's a...
There's also things in democratic reforms we have reduce populism in Europe in general. For example, bipartisan in France or in England helps the UKIP or the FED.
Yeah, okay, they are national... Okay, there's some problems of representation, I would say, in Britain too. And there are discussions about reforms of the electoral system. But these discussions are ongoing for 50 years, I would say. Yes, there are national factors explaining this to it would be interesting to compare all 28 European countries and especially to deal with the countries, the exceptions. Why is there no populism in Portugal? I'm not sure whether there's no populism. But, I mean, the core EU countries, Italy, what do you make out of the movement 5 stars? Is it a right-wing movement? Is it a left-wing movement? Is it a movement of the desperate people? I don't know. So you have sometimes these irrational, I call them irrational parties, because I can hardly find any program. I mean, they just say, we are the people, yes, it's fine. So we have even these movements, you know, and they are strong. The five-star movement in Italy is one of the strongest movements. Sorry? Yeah. Yeah, any more questions? But again, this is a good topic for PhD dissertation. The links is populist argument to the economic crisis. With time lapse. I mean, crisis is not directly translating to populist without this time lapse. Okay, yes, please.
Congratulations on the presentation. It was really interesting. It's just a remark concerning populism. There are elements of populism present all over the political spectrum. And if we take the case of Romania, which we discussed yesterday, there is no populist party, no far-right or far-left political party in the Romanian parliament or in the European Parliament. Why? Simply because populism is spread all over the political spectrum in the right-wing, left-wing, center parties that incorporate elements of social populism, economic populism, redistribution, and other such things. So I would say that in the end, we don't have to work with this cleavage, left-right cleavage, in order to define how populism should function. Nor to try to find political parties that represent populism within the political spectrum. Populism could be present within movements of the mainstream that get increasingly populist. They could be of the right or of the left. In your example concerning Beppe Grillo's party in Italy, I think it's a case of populism that just breaks the left-wing, left-right cleavage. It breaks it down and makes a combination of what? Of social elements of redistribution coming from the left, and it's clearly anti-elitist and in favor of redistribution through the state mechanisms, and at the same time elements of paradoxically anti-fiscalism, elements of nationalism, of local patriotism that are specific to the conservative camp, so of the right. So I don't think that we should work with the left-right cleavage when discussing about populism, because simply it doesn't fit for the same discussion.
I agree. Thank you for this idea. I would say the new cleavage probably is in favor of EU or anti-EU. It seems to be a cleavage which is visible in all countries. And it's, in many cases, the losers are organized, they were given voice by populist parties. Not in the case of Germany, because we don't have so many losers. We have losers, but we have more people who are afraid to lose. So this is a different thing, I would say. But in general, I would say yes. But, I mean, if I understand you correctly, this is a problem which would continue. Because, I mean, you could say the simple answers are really an answer to a complex globalization as well. If things are really complex, people tend, because it makes their idea of the world easier, to look for simple solutions. Not populists offer simple solutions. Stop immigration. This is very simple. And if you fear competition on the labor market, immigrants, of course. And we have a bizarre discussion in Germany about Romanian gypsies coming to Germany. It's bizarre. It's a very small number, and it's a social problem for some, very few cities. But the Germans think that millions will come. It's totally irrational, I would say. Not for some of the communities who are really affected because they have some special problems. But, you know, we desperately need skilled workers, for example. And we made so many mistakes because of populism. For example, there was the free movement of labor in the EU. And German resistance led to, I would say, a slowed down transition to a transitional agreement which said there will be free movement of labor, but except for a few countries, and there will be a 10-year transition period. In these 10 years, we lost many skilled workers because they all went to Ireland and Great Britain, who opened up their labor market immediately. And that was a big mistake. Why? Because the conservative government at that time feared that immigrants, well, actually they knew that immigrants won't come in millions, but they feared to be punished at the ports. This is very simple. So actually, you know, I really believe in this two-level game theory, that politicians are always bargaining on two tables. One is international one and one is domestic. And they are always these interrelated bargaining processes. And I think one can really show this with the immigration debate or this Euro debate. But I stop giving another lecture on that. Well, any more questions?
Yes,
oh, yeah, sure.
Could you tell us something more about Germany's economic relations to Russia because they offer 10 data. And quick comments, yes, the numbers of Croatian youth in unemployment were right.
So I didn't get that.
The percentage of Croatian youth unemployment, you were right. You were asking, were they right or they were right?
The number of Croatian youth unemployment is right.
Oh, okay. Right. Yeah, but I mean, you come from Croatia, you must know better.
Yeah,
so you could comment on this as well. Because I cannot believe the figure of 49%.
Yeah, we're third after Greece and Spain, I think. For the young unemployment.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Because Croatia was no, it was Croatia. But I can tell you something about Russia, economic relations to Russia. Well, the trade volume is 80 billion annually, 80 billion, which is quite large. And we import more from Russia than we export because of natural gas, and especially natural gas and some oil. I would say the economic relations are important for some companies active in this business here. But in total, I think the trade between Russia and Germany makes up only 3 or 4% of German total trade. But some companies would be affected in case of sanctions. The industry, the representatives of the industry, they always declare we will lose probably 100,000 jobs. Nobody knows this, actually. Nobody knows this. But of course, the Germans will not do anymore invest into Russia. Especially the smaller companies, they shy away from investment in Russia. And there's a big debate in Germany about what to do now, about sanctions, for example. The majority is, Germany is really split 50-50%, I would say. To have sanctions in place and not to have sanctions. The point is that the EU is, as I demonstrated on Monday, they speak with one voice, but now it will come, now the crunch will come, whether they were really in favor of sanctions or not. And Germany actually puts one foot on the brake with the sanctions, because they say it will not make any sense, but they don't have any alternative. So they are still waiting for Russia to go back to the negotiation table. They still believe that we can make a deal with the Russians. Don't let's talk about Crimea, but Ukraine. Of course, they are scared of this idea of Russian influence in Ukraine reaching from Donetsk to Transnistria, Novorossiya. They are really scared about this, but probably other countries too. So they actually have no answer. They have no crisis management in this respect, because our tradition is to negotiate this. Military means that nobody's discussing military means in Germany. Anything else? Oh, sure.
I want to say about my experience here in Poland. When it was Independence Day here in Poland, I could see also a big fire and the flags of the European Union there. And I was really surprised because Poland, up to 2020, will get money from the European Union fund. And my question was, why is like this? And the answer was from the Urząd here, like authority of the city. And they say like, basically the loose identity of the Poland, like it is, because the French and Germany already is so mixed up with another country relations, that we said about before. So, do you see any risks for the European Union about such kind of movements in the countries that become into part of the European Union last time, I have to say like this?
Probably don't understand your question quite correctly.
Okay, do you see any risks for the future of European Union because of such kind of movements against the European